Hello, and very warm welcome back to MEF Connect's Digital Transformation. We've just come off a few sessions looking at the whole area of direct carrier billing, mobile subscriptions, and we're going to be tackling things from a little bit of a different angle. Now to introduce you to explain exactly what's coming up next is Michael Becker.
Hey there. How you doing, James? Good morning. Nice to hear you.
Welcome back. And thanks first of all for closing yesterday's day with yourself on stage with your presentation. And now this is the first of two sessions coming up. What have we got coming up for the audience now, Michael?
So I'm thoroughly excited about this one. We're going to have a conversation with Seema Johnson from Nuggets. And what's happening right now in the world, as I was talking about yesterday, we have this merging of the organizational centric and people centric approaches to personal data and identity. And Seema's group, Nuggets, is one of those companies that are actually enabling us to stitch those two rivers together, to be able to create a merged approach that serves both the industry and the individual at the same time, and to do so that in a way that empowers people to have self-sovereign control over their data and their identity. And
That's
so
fantastic.
It's really, really exciting. And they're also enabling it and enabling payment. So I don't want to steal Seema's thunder. So let's bring her on
We're
stage.
coming to that. And I'm going to leave you to it. But first of all, who are you? What do you do, Michael? Because there might be some people.
So thank you very much. So that's right. So my name is Michael Becker, and I'm a strategic advisor helping Fortune 500 brands and nonprofits survive and navigate these meeting of the waters. This meeting of the waters, what I mean by that is this traditional organizational centric approach that's been evolving for well over 100 years on how we manage data is now in the process of merging with a new people centric approach to personal data and identity. That is technologies and services and business models and regulations and such that will empower people to start taking more control over their identity and personal information. And right now we're at a confluence where these two approaches have now merged in society. And the question is going to be, how do we go from where we are today to where we want to be as a society 5, 6, 10 years from now? And that's the conversation we're going to be having. And thank you for the backdrop. I forgot that some people on this session may not have heard yesterday's.
Exactly.
So the whole idea is, how do we bring that? And I run the MEF's Personal Data and Identity Working Group. You're all invited to join us and have active conversations and how do we navigate this changing industry.
Fantastic. So it's clear from discussions with you offline, as well as everything I've seen with the PD&I group and previous events, as well with your involvement and bringing your customers along too, that there's a real battle going on out there. There's a real battle going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. So I'll leave you to it, Michael, to introduce your speaker, and have a great session. I'll be back at the end. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you. So how do we bring James, how do I bring Seema on, actually? There she is. Hey, Seema, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I am thoroughly excited. I'm thrilled to have you here. And so for over the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to have a chat about identity and personal information. And we'll be moderating together the comments section on the screen so we can have people ask us questions during the process as well. So let's kick things off right now. Like, who are you? What are you doing? What's Nuggets do?
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, it's wonderful to be here. It's an incredibly hot day for anyone dialing in from London today. It's like 39 degrees. So bear with me and my hair as the fan blows. So good to be here. I'm Seema Khinda Johnson. I'm co-founder and COO of Nuggets. My background has been in tech for the last 23, 24 years, working for organizations that you may have heard of like Skype and Microsoft. And then set up my own business in late 2016, which is Nuggets, and we deliver trusted transactions using verified self-sovereign digital identities. I also sit on the technical advisory committee of ID 2020. So yeah, really excited to be here and share more about the work that we're doing and the real problems that we're solving around digital identity, data, trust, safety, security, and privacy.
Fantastic. Now we're gonna go back and forth between some. We're not having a presentation per se, but we're gonna go back and forth between some slides that I've created, just to help stimulate people's ideas. And so you've got some great, logos going on here that kind of gives a backdrop of what you're doing. You've won tons of awards, and you're working with a number of groups. And you just mentioned the ID 2020 model. explain this to me. I mean, what's exciting of what I see in this slide is, there are a lot of big names and there are a lot of big logos going on here. And so clearly something's happening in this identity and personal information space that we all need to be paying attention to. So what's happening with these awards and the areas where you're putting influence in the industry?
Yeah, I think this is the key thing, right? We've been totally obsessed with the problem that we're solving. It came from, so before I go into the logos, I'll just talk to you about why these awards and affiliations are more than just logos. It's that we came for this problem rather than going from it a technology way. We were looking at what is the problem that we're solving. And the problem that we're solving is one of trust and the data breaches. You'll probably know that every day there's a data breach, right? And there's a huge, huge trust problem. Whenever customers sign up, transact or access services online, they're open to fraud, privacy and security issues. And that's, and Michael, you probably know as well, because when the internet and these services were built, no one thought through that identity layer. So what we've been obsessed with doing.
Let's stop right there. I think let's take a pause right there, because we have time. We've got a nice block of time to have this conversation. So a lot of people may not think that through or be aware of that, what you just said, right? When the internet was born, we didn't really think about this identity and services layer. What does that really even mean? Can you give us a little bit of history from your perspective on when the internet was born and what did we miss?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, Web 0 was just some information. Like we probably all remember trying to make like flashing text on email for those of us that are in our late 40s and 50s. And then after that, it became almost like a community, but it became all the big tech companies that had us in walled gardens and where we couldn't move our identity information outside of that. And I think the big thing is now it's more about that ownership and control. But the big deal is that we've spent lots and lots of money trying to get content right, community right, even payments right on the internet. But what we've never got right is this identity layer, which is, currently our privacy and security relies on things like what we can remember, our usernames and passwords, or what we have in our hands. And some of you will be familiar with things called device IDs. But actually, the internet and our experiences don't rely on a verified identity. And that's the piece that's really missing. And I think when you ask me, and that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the identity layer missing. The identity layer is missing. Yeah, go on, Michael.
Yeah, and I was just commenting. So going back even farther. So, the internet was invented in the late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
And what was fascinating about that is, to your point, they really didn't even think about someone's identity and, really identity. Like, I know for a fact who you are, because when it was first invented, it was a bunch of researchers who already knew who they were. So they connected computers together, created authentication credentials that would allow them to log in and log out of the systems. But there was this implicit trust when two computers connected together, because they already knew who was on it. And it was very interesting. It was about there was an MIT article, and people can ping me later after the session and I'll happily share it. But there's a story about the first password hack that happened about a couple months before after the researchers turned on the internet, if you will. Because one of the guys wanted to steal mainframe time from his buddies in the middle of the night. So he downloaded everybody's passwords and then used the mainframes in the middle of the night to be able to get his work done. And so shortly thereafter, we entered into this immediate first problem. But it's now taken us decades to layer on to this thing we call the internet, which is basically what you're doing to be able to actually let us know who that person is on the other end. So let's talk about that then. So we built this internet where we could exchange content, and now you're layering on with industry standards. And I think that's where that sea of logos that we shared earlier are so important. With industry standards, we're enabling this ability to actually know not only who I am as an individual on the internet, but for me to actually know who the company is, know the entity on the other end of the internet. So explain that for me a little bit.
Yeah, Michael, I think it's really interesting that and before I go into explaining that story, right? So from the beginning, we should have realized that usernames and passwords weren't fit for purpose because, They were already being compromised at that scale. And I think that's the thing. You talked about this earlier in your introduction as well. It's the meeting or an on-ramp really between identities that are consumer related and those from an enterprise perspective as well. So what we want to be doing as an industry is ensuring the bit that's missing right now around walled gardens is this global interoperability piece, but also building products and services that meet the requirements of our everyday type use cases. And when we talk about identity, we don't talk about identity in almost like a silo. We have to, as individuals, interact with businesses, whether that is logging in, whether that's authenticating, whether that's paying for some service, which means our identity solutions need to not just work for an end user consumer, but they need to also work for the businesses and give the businesses what they need from those identities, which is absolute 100 assurance that it actually is Seema behind that transaction. But also, like we all know in this regulated space, there's lots of other requirements of our identities, whether they're things like, anti-money laundering or financial crime or there's so many different acronyms there, but essentially around financial crime and not doing a bad thing. So our identities need to go further to meet not only the requirements of a consumer, but the business, but also regulations and compliance teams. And I think it's only really then, Michael, that you can meet the requirements for all of those participants. And then you really would have that, when you talked about the merge, no one really loses out then.
Right. And again, let's just be kind of clear about this. So when we're thinking about this idea called the internet and experiences and exchanges, what I just heard you say, and this is briefly what I talked about in my session yesterday, is there are three primary actors in the industry. There's an individual, there are enterprises, and then there are governmental institutions. And typically what we would do is we would have both private and public exchanges between those three players to create and share value. But what I just heard you say is part of the problem is, and that's why we've been so zealotly putting on this identity layer into the internet over the last 20 years or so, is we need to know who these people are. So you just emphasized from an enterprise's perspective, I need to, there's regulation, know your customer, because banks absolutely need to know your customer to be able to attack fraud and cyber crimes and other types of issues. But at the same token, I, as an individual, absolutely want to know it's Amazon, so I'm not getting phished, right? Because those attacks are so good now. When I click on a link, even the experts can't tell if that website or that email isn't, say, Amazon or a bank or something of that nature. And so having some way of verifying with cryptographic certainty that communication is secure and that the entities on both ends are who they say they are. I believe that's what you're telling us. Is that not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's it. It's meeting the requirements on all sides. And that's what we've had up until now, is we haven't done that. And I'm absolutely saying that because unless it's all well and good a bank knows it's me or an e-commerce store knows it's me. But how do I know when the bank calls me on my mobile? How do I know when I click on an email that it isn't my banking email and I unwittingly give away all my account details? We should absolutely be building products and services that mean that it doesn't matter if I click on a link. It doesn't matter if I provide this other information. It would be impossible for me to breach that data. And the only way you can get that, Michael, you're absolutely right, is by having verified identities at both ends or at all ends of a transaction, whether that is the consumer, whether that is the business, whether it is business to business, whether it's with the regulator. So there is just no area for, misuse or, and I think once you create systems like this that are cryptographically proven, that make it impossible, and take the responsibility away from our end users, right? We've got enough to do outside of our everyday lives. We shouldn't be worrying about our privacy and security, and businesses should know that their customers are safe from social engineering or phishing. And that's why that cryptographic proof is so important, Michael.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to that language again in a minute, because I think part of repeating a little bit of this is important. So we're setting the stage that we need to have this cryptographic proof. And I think that's part of what we'll call the trust problem. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit in why the industry is not working. We've already kind of alluded to it a bit, but let's quantify it a bit if we can. So when we're out there in the internet, we've all, because of this, I don't know who you are, you don't know who I am. We have these risks of identity fraud and such. Can you help us quantify and bullet out some of the trust issues that are happening in the marketplace and why that matters?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a huge, huge trust problem, right? And I talked about this in my introduction. You know, trust that supports our everyday lives, whether we're logging in, whether we're paying, whether we're verifying our IDs online, we're open to fraud, privacy, safety, security issues. And these aren't going away. And when you think in the US, the average cost of a data breach is over 8 million, and the average cost of a data breach in Europe is over 4 million, you start to understand that the scale of this problem. And it isn't just the businesses that are suffering and that user data. Phishing attacks have gone up year on year, despite the hundreds of millions we're spending on fraud detection, fraud prevention. And we all know someone that's been socially engineered, right? Whether it's our cards or, you know, whether it's our usernames and passwords, or we've unwittingly clicked on a link. So this is a huge problem. And trust, safety, security and privacy, I mean, you will not find one organization where that isn't at the top of their annual report, saying that we need to address these problems. And how do we address these problems? So it's a massive
let's start with a basic concept, though. I mean, those are some interesting signs, but like, how do we define trust? Like, what is trust? What does trust mean when we're coming onto the internet?
Yeah, I mean, for me, what trust means is that I need to know who I'm dealing with and who's on the other end of that transaction. To me, what trust is that I care about what I'm doing online. I mean, Michael, what does it mean for you?
Yeah, so I take it from a very academic perspective, and that's a great question. So for me, when I think about it, like Sim Simkin over Duke University talks a lot about trust. And, you know, for them, and there's a massive amounts of research behind this, but it's really the idea fundamentally for me to be able to engage into a relationship and be vulnerable and trust that the parties that I'm choosing to interact with will meet their obligations, do so with correct intent, and do so without harm, right? Mistakes happen. And if mistakes happen and I do get harmed, like I lose some money, or I don't get that discount or something like that, or my product breaks that I just bought. When we trust that when those problems happen, that's where customer support comes in, or where we heard about it in the previous session when they were talking about, look, when we're working with carriers and something goes wrong, we take care of it. That's trust, right? Yeah. Where you lose trust is when parties do not have good intent, when their intention is actually to cause harm, and that when you can't truly be vulnerable in a situation because you're going to be harmed. So when we can when we can trust, when we can have the sense that the people that we're interacting with will meet their expectations, will meet their obligations, will cause no harm, and do not have an intention of harm, and then I can be vulnerable in that situation, and that's trust.
And I get it, and I don't think we're a million miles away, right? Because I think it's less also about intent. Lots of organizations don't have, they're not intent on breaching our data. It's just that the current solutions that they have at their disposal actually aren't fit for purpose, because when they really look at the problem they're solving, they're making do with some of these solutions. So I would say to you to take that a step further. I think it's less to do with, every organization that I deal with, I'm sure they don't want to breach my data. I am sure they're not intent, and they want us as consumers to be vulnerable and not have to worry about our privacy and security. But the issue is, unless we solve this trust problem, these breaches are going to continue, because, these organizations want to do their very best. And they're not out to get us. And that's why we need to be creating solutions.
Yeah. I'm going to challenge you a little bit on just what you said. You just said, unless we solve the trust problem. And I'm glad this is kind of where the conversation is taking us, because in that regard, I don't think we have a trust problem. What we have is a technology problem, right? Which is what Nuggets and the Standards and other players are solving. Yeah. Because I think you're right. I think for the vast majority of organizations, the trust is there. I want to meet my obligations. I want to fulfill. I don't want to cause harm. But because my technology that I'm currently using in my infrastructure is not fit for purpose in today's internet, that is causing the problems that we're experiencing. So and again, I really like this, because we might be switching from we have a trust problem to we have a lack of trust support problem, right? And that maybe that can take us to the next part of the dialogue on where we go with this. So
yeah, and Michael, I was just gonna. Oh, sorry, I was just going to add there though. But when you're on Discord or you're on these community chats, and like you mentioned, some of these fraudsters are becoming ingenious, right? They're stunning, and these aren't brands that are creating these frauds. These are bad actors in the industry that are creating these frauds. So I would press you on.
Well, no,
yes.
so let's talk about. I talk about it. I want to stemming off of. I think you're right. The vast majority of organizations, have commit to what they want to do, have the right intent, have no intention of harm.
Agreed.
I personally believe the vast majority of the world is trustworthy.
Yeah,
they're facing a technology challenge.
Yeah,
but then there are that small percentage of people out there in the world that are bad actors, and we have to deal with them, and that's why we have law enforcement, and that's why we have regulators. I think the solution to both enabling the people's whose technology is not fit for purpose and stopping those bad actors is a technology problem, not as much as So we're 90. Let's say 4% of the people out there are the bad actors, right? We're 96% a technology problem for those good actors, and we're 4% a trust and technology problem for those bad actors. And I think that's kind of a more concise way of presenting the problem. Okay, so with that in mind, let's talk about, and I want to walk us through a couple little slides that get us to your ability to explain the technology of what's going. So when we, when the original internet was created, we used what was called centralized identity. And I think this is the MIT example that we were discussing, where an individual would interact with a company or computer. I'd create login credentials and I'd share data from me to this company, and it would all be sitting on that company's computer systems. And this company's computer systems that gets hacked, or the data gets misused unintentionally often, right? Because they brought data in, but then that data would get used for other purposes than what was originally intended, and so that would cause problems in the marketplace. So that's do you agree this is where the industry originally started, this kind of centralized identity?
I do. Yeah, I do.
All right, and then this social media world came into play, right? Where you had Google sign in with Google, sign in with Apple. A lot of it originally started with sign in with Facebook, where that identity credential that I was originally using with the company got kind of outsourced to the third party, so that as a user, that reduced friction for me in the marketplace. And I think that's another one of the problems in the market we have right now is friction. That would reduce friction in the marketplace, so I could not really have to remember all these username and passwords. I could just sign in with my one, Facebook or Google login. But then that created a new layer of challenge. And what are some of the challenges that get created with this type of environment?
Well, I think that's it, right? We were unwittingly giving away so much more data at that stage. I mean, although we had the convenience, which was wonderful, and it was a delightful customer experience, what I think a lot of users in the internet didn't realize is they were not only giving away their own data and being tracked, whether it was within that experience, but they were giving away their friends, families, contacts information as well, and not being able to really understand what that data was being used for. And I think that was one of the real bad outputs of this. In exchange for delightful customer experience, I was also then giving away, and it almost felt like a necessary evil at the time, because there was no alternative. So I think that's one of the really big things that had come out, and we've probably all heard of, is it Google Analytica and some of these other huge breaches with this data that we just didn't even realize we were giving away with using social federated login.
Well, and if you think about it at the time too, we've heard this language before, if you're not paying for it, you're the product. And so if you think about it, the way the social media models work, and there was nothing, again, I don't think it was overly malintentful at the point, in that they had businesses to run and they had business models to run. In that regard is, I'm going to monetize my company by giving you a free service, providing you and providing the industry as a whole this convenient, efficient means of logging in. And the currency for that's going to be personal data. and that's going to then allow me to create really rich personalized marketing, create really rich targeted advertising, create really rich immersive experiences across the internet, create intentful based experiences. But again, that has led to and somewhat exacerbated some of the other problems that we occurred. Data breaches, phishing attacks, the technology itself to protect myself. That we've now got this privacy preserving game of whack-a-mole where the mole pops up over here and I've got to add yet another piece of technology in my life, a VPN perhaps, to protect myself, and that when it pops up over here. And I think again, with considering that the vast majority of the people world have good intent, it's just unintended consequences have grown through this process.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you think that we all signed up for that, or we thought we were the product. But if you were to stop someone on the street,
no, I don't think we did. I don't think we did sign up for it, but that was the unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences.
Eventually realized.
And I know in tech we say things like, we're the product if we're not paying for it, but actually by that point, the ship had sailed. And I think that's the thing. I think if we really had an understanding of to what extent our data was being mined and for what purposes, and that's why we then have now, huge things. I mean, my work involved in ID 2020 is that privacy is a fundamental human right. So there have been, and it's hard to get that back now, given how much data that we have out there. So it's an interesting perspective, Michael, on the, where we now find ourselves with these social.
Yeah, well, and I want to talk to you about that. I want to do so. Privacy is a human right. Actually, can anchor itself all the way back to the human rights legislation of the World Economic Forum, and back in as far back as the 1950s in the World Bank, when they were all establishing in their principles that this idea that we have the right to be in control of ourselves is appropriate. And you brought up the word privacy a few times in this conversation. And I think it's really important for us to define it now, in that when we talk about and we look at an infrastructure layer, like what we're looking on in this slide right now, going back to that point of the three actors, the individual, the enterprise, and the public institution. The enterprise's really responsibilities. If you're taking and going to be a steward of my data, you have I have an expectation and accountability that you will keep that data secure, and that you will keep that data, and manage who gets to have authorization to that. We often will conflate the definition of privacy with that of cybersecurity and security in general. They're actually very different concepts. Security is all about this idea that you only those who have the authority to access and are authorized to use that data can. The idea of privacy is very different. It's an individual concept that I get to choose the who, what, when, where, for how long, and for what purpose someone has access to me, right? Whether it's physical or now increasingly digital. And again, I believe that's what and let's start moving on. Well, that's what Nuggets is actually empowering. It's actually solving both the cybersecurity problem and the privacy problem. It's ensuring that only authorized users and authorized individuals can have access to data. And it's ensuring that the person has the authority to control their privacy, to choose the who, what, when, where, for what purpose, and for how long. Would agree with those kind of definitions?
Absolutely. I mean, you've put it in a really wonderful way, actually, because I think for too long there's been compromises on either side to come up with a solution, and we've been able to at Nuggets develop a solution that means that users stay in, have a sense of control over their identity information, their PII data, but at the same time, enterprises, companies, regulators, government can have access to that data, and it can be secured and private and, have all of these things, but it can actually, meet the requirements of everyone, but not unwittingly give it away. And look, I love that you've put that slide up. So it absolutely is, it's a massive paradigm shift, the one that we've explained today in this short session around before everyone had controlled all of your PII and personal data, whether it was an enterprise, whether you were buying a washing machine or a white goods, to you were logging into a service to find some information, or an e-commerce store. Everyone had our own data, And actually, this new paradigm shift is that we're developing solutions that mean users stay in control of their own information, but they're able to do everything that we need to do in our everyday lives, whether that is logging in, paying, verifying, authenticating, and actually doing it in such a delightful way, which means that you stop having to worry about your privacy, safety, and security. And meanwhile, businesses get from that data exactly what they need, Michael, which
right.
could
And
be.
then likewise with this technical infrastructure that businesses will now put into their business, they are now addressing their security problems.
Absolutely.
So I think this solution is both a privacy solution for the individual, and it's also a cybersecurity and security solution for the enterprises. And it also reduces enterprise risk, because in the solution we're just about to explain, enterprises no longer need to hold the data. And so in which case there's nothing to breach, which then starts helping it about as well. So as in this world of decentralized identity, self-sovereign identity, verified credentials, there's a lot of technology soup here.
Yeah.
Explain to us this new paradigm. So we're moving from, just to be clear for everyone seeing, we've moved from early 90s, 2000s to 2010s, 2020, up to 2020. And then starting around 2000, technologically, this has been under development for about 20, 25 years, theoretically for about 50. So just so everyone knows, when you see this stuff, it's not like it's brand new and it just showed up yesterday. It's been evolving for a long time. Explain to us this trust triangle and how this is different than the federated model.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because you have a number of issuers of identity, right? That could be public record.
Let's start with who's an issuer of identity. Explain that.
Yeah, an issuer of identity could be a government. It could be a passport. It could be the DVLA in the UK, which is your driver's license. So they issue an identity. Michael, is that clear?
But it also could be a company too. Like, I'm issuing you a credential because you're logging into my site.
It could be, and they could also be a verifier. So I think rather than going into these specifically, but for my case, let's say, because I'm taking Nuggets as an example, an issuer in our case is always based on a government issued identity, because we want to make sure that the person who is on the other end of that verified identity is someone that is real and someone that has got a trusted identity. So in our case, an issuer is a government agency. It could be a passport, it might be a driver's license, and it could be a direct attestation from DVLA or the passport office that issues that original credential to you as a verifiable credential. And that verified credential, without getting too techie, is basically looking at your ID information and basically cryptographically proving that you are who you say you are. So if you say your name is Seema,
yeah,
go on, Michael.
So so we're running out of time, so I don't want to. So they've issued me a driver's license, right? I then go into the Nuggets experience and show that driver's license. You verify that I am who I am, and you produce a cryptographic identity that I then can share with others to say, this is Michael Becker, right?
Absolutely.
And then that other company does what? They check some public registry?
No, the other company, well, it depends what you're doing, right? If you're doing if you're carrying out a home buying transaction, well, then maybe there is some public record checking, like a death certificate, like a mortality register, or maybe they're looking at credentials. Oh, I like that you've gone to some use cases here. But actually, I think the big thing here, Michael, is bringing Nuggets to life, because we're using all these technical words and, things that we internally probably would use. But actually, the product itself, using all this great technology, using things like cryptography, verifiable credentials, open standards, these products are incredibly delightful products, right? You're able to do simple things like log in, pay, like I mentioned, but you can be 100% sure who's behind each and every one of those transactions.
So let's say I'm a bank, right?
Yes.
Such as this case example you have here. Let's say I'm FinBank here.
Yeah.
What happens? I contact Seema at Nuggets and I say, hey, Seema, I saw this MEF session, loved it. I want to know how to give people privacy and protect my organization at the same time. What do I do? What do I need? Where do I start with you? What do I do when I call you, and what needs to happen next?
Yeah, absolutely. So you contact me and then we will share with you. We'll understand exactly what problems you're trying to solve for. And then we'll work out our products like totally modular, can be white labeled, and then we'll talk to you about our APIs. But yeah, I think the first thing is
yeah. So let's just really cut to the chase there. So what will happen is I'll call you and you say, you integrate nuggets into your website or into your mobile app. And that when your users come to your site to register with you, rather than the federated model, they're going to create a credential which they own that will sit in a secure wallet that sits on their phone that they own or are in control of. And then every time they want to log in with you, or every time they want to conduct a payment with you or anybody else powered by the Nuggets network or any other verified credential model in the marketplace, they're securely exchanging they're in control of their identity. They're in control of their payment systems. They're not sharing sensitive personal data with you or any other company. And you're able to have that privacy control and security control of now a Web 3.0 internet, if you will, or a metaverse type experience, if you will, without having really to concern ourselves with what we've been worried about for the last 20 years.
Yeah, wonderful. Exactly that. But I would say to you, it's not just Web3 and metaverse, right, which are these new concepts around decentralization. The beauty of these open standards-based identities is that they work on your existing products and services today to deliver things like strong customer authentication, to deliver a verified ID logging into a Web2 type experience or on your mobile, on a normal e-commerce website powered by Magento. So although they're future facing, they work with our everyday products and services that billions of us are using today.
I think you've hit a key point there too. So what this also means then is because they're open standard and because they're recognizable, your company's developers will recognize this code. This is nothing new, right? This is a derivative of what they've been working on forever.
Absolutely. And actually, just about 2 weeks ago, the W3C, which you may have heard of, that Tim Berners-Lee is director of, confirmed that DIDs should be accepted by all internet browsers. So I think it's so nothing here, all of this, we've taken all the complexity out of this, and all your developers and product owners and managers will understand what we've built and how to.
And then let's emphasize that you brought in a new terminology that I think is important too. A decentralized identifier. So a decentralized identifier is nothing more than a cryptographic username and password, for the lack of a better term, a credential that has become the new layer of the internet. So the WC3 is another term you threw out there. It's the World Wide Web Consortium, and they're the entity out in the air in the internet world that allows people, that helps set the standards for the internet. And what you just told us was the inventor of the internet some 50 years ago has now been working with the WC3 and you very specifically and others around the industry to add this new protective layer as a standard on the internet. So this is what's going to bring us up into the Web 3.0 world, and all of the existing Web 2.0 technologies, as they start integrating this new industry standard onto the into their web experiences and into their mobile app experiences, into their internet-enabled physical experiences, will all be brought into this new privacy-preserving, protected cryptographic technology.
I mean, perfect. I couldn't have put it better myself. Thanks for that, Michael. It's exactly that.
And then just to wrap it up, because again, I can talk to you for hours, and James is going to get ready to give us the hook.
Yeah.
The point being is, you're one of the preeminent players in this industry. You started a few years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago. I don't remember the exact date. And you've been actually intimately involved with nurturing, and you and your co-founder, intimately involved with nurturing these standards and getting this to this point. So if you're a bank, or if you're a telco, or if you're a web company, or if you're a retailer, if you're any number of those use case need to fulfill any number of those use cases we showed up on the slide earlier, basically they call you, you help them out, and we can get them there. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. We can support you in that journey. So yeah, we've been involved from the beginning, maybe not 50 years ago, but the last.
No, I said 5 to 6. But 50 was the early.
I know. Sorry, I felt like James had a question.
I do. My question is very, very simple. So much in life is driven by the commercial model. And at the end of the day, at what point does trust get thrown out of the window if the price is right?
Yeah.
So in simple language, it's the same whether it be in the world of SMS messaging, you're wanting to do the right thing, use the direct channel with the mobile operator. but for whatever reason, you view that price as being too high. So therefore, I'm going to use an under the table route, which is a bit dodgy. So in this situation, it's a case of, do you know what? If they have my data, if I'm giving away Michael's data, I don't care because I'm getting 50% off at the cinema.
Yeah.
Oh, great question.
But James, yeah,
At
no.
what point does trust absolutely go out of the window, where we all can say we want to do the right thing, but then there's this massive carrot dangled in front of you in terms of this, and that all goes.
So James, that's a really interesting observation. So firstly, this is a B2B2C product, meaning consumers don't pay for anything, right? And if you stop to consumer, we all love our discounts, but actually if the thing that keeps up consumers is, they've been phished or they've been socially engineered, they just want to log in and do the right thing. Give me that 20% off, but make sure that I'm not going to get scammed. Okay, these numbers are stunning in how big they are. It's something like 9 out of 10 owners of an NFT or anyone has been socially engineered or been phished. And that's not even talking about our everyday experiences on things like Gumtree and everything else. But when you talk to businesses that do pay our commercial fees, they're already losing millions on fraud. They already have budgets assigned to things like, you've probably heard it, one customer view, or huge data cleanse projects, or application processes. So when you think, instead of those applications taking days, technologies like this can not only preserve privacy, provide security, but can take minutes or seconds. You have a huge operational saving there. So, these types of products, they make sense from a commercial perspective, but I think you hit the nail on the head. On consumers shouldn't be paying for products and services like this. It should be inherent in their experiences.
Yeah. And that's the problem. I think for security, you end up having people say, oh, to be secure, I've got to pay more, and I'll pass that cost through to the consumer.
So I think you nailed it. From the consumer side, you're right. We're going to give it up because we want the convenience. And so what we are going to start seeing, and Don Peppers wrote a book called Extreme Trust, and I agree with him on this, that trust will become the differentiator. So it's going to be the difference between companies that show sign in with nuggets and those that don't. And when I, as a consumer, learn that, I'm going to go work with the company that's using verified credentials as a standard, because I'm going to have a more efficient experience. It's going to be it's going to be cleaner. I'll be more secure versus not.
So I think at the end of the day, I'm sorry, but we've got to wrap this up because we're over.
And one last point, James, and then we'll wrap it up. Is from an operational perspective, like Bonify, a Nuggets-like provider for credit unions, demonstrated that they took account sign-ins down from 15 minutes to 15 seconds and saved themselves $150,000 in cybercrime. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's why you want to be adopting solutions like Nuggets or a Bonify or any of these other ones that are enabling these new standards.
Because it's consumers' time. That's what it comes down to at the end of the day. And we talked about that in a previous session. Yeah. So thank you very much. It's clear. It's well worth that investment in security. It pays dividends, not in the long run. It pays dividends instantly. That's clear from the session. So, Seema, thank you very much for joining us. Michael, Michael, you're going to be back very soon for your next session. So see you back in a few seconds. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you, Seema.